And my name's Mafi, Funaki Tahifote, and I work at the Heart Foundation's Pacific Heartbeat team as the manager of Pacific Health. Pacific family, when you're asking what are the priorities in life for them, and thinking Pacific families, this is not just a one ethnic group. You're talking about Samoans, you're talking about Tongans, Niueans, Cook Islands, Fijians. So priorities to Pacific families overall is them themselves as families. Education, church, work, all of that on the outskirts. But central to Pacific families is really important to them is family or whānau or family. So as health professionals, we're looking at food as a vehicle to get nutrients into our bodies for nourishment. But for Pacific, it is much more than that. It brings families together, whether it be a celebration of a wedding, a birthday, but it can also bring families together around if it's a sad occasion like a funeral. It also acts as a vehicle to mend relationships. Like if you wrong somebody, then food will be that vehicle to say sorry. From a health perspective, we're looking at the nutritional quality of foods, but for Pacific people in such a busy, time-poor environment in New Zealand, quality can mean for Pacific that convenience and fast foods. When you're looking at whakaafe, or where you're inviting people to a celebration, whakaafe is a Tongan word, or a gathering that you have, quality would mean having quantities of food enough to serve your guests. And then your guests can also take food home. In New Zealand, where we've got a multi-Polynesian culture, we tend to also adopt some of the other customs of the other islands. Now, Tongans and Samoans are also taking up that culture of having foods and then taking some foods home. So quality from that gathering, feast or celebrations, or whether it be a funeral, that you got the quantities of food. One of the youth group that we talked with, he said, quality is quantity. So for Pacific, food connecting with health doesn't become an important issue until someone in the family is sick. And it tends to be that food to help manage ill health or maintain good health actually only applies to the person who's identified sick. So it is about having a rationale or a desire that you'll move for the person you're talking with to actually make food and health actually become important even when sickness is not present. How you do that, it will be a conversation, and knowing family is important to them, maybe that vehicle to bring in health and food for Pacific, whether it be to manage an illness that they'll have or to prevent them from actually getting an illness. Size is not a sickness. So why then should I worry about my weight if I'm well? So there is a challenge, but it's a conversation that we can still have to try and create a desire and a recognition that you don't have to feel sick to then work on the foods that we have around us. So it's a conversation that we'll still have to have with Pacific people about trying to connect people even when sickness is not there. It's a conversation and a talanoa that you will have with Pacific people to see how important this action and advice to the life of the family. The obligations you have for your family, if it does make me do my role as a mum a lot better for a lot longer years, I think that will actually get the conversation around, for me as a mum, to be wanting to make a change for my child. I think the best encouragement health professionals can have for Pacific people is putting themselves in the shoes of Pacific families or the clients that are in front of them. That they understand the context where that family's at, taking into consideration their household, how many generations are in their household. That does have an impact on who prepares the food, who purchases the food, meal times that they have. Because for a large household with different schedules, it may be that they have 3 or 4 dinners at night. So for your children, for your family, they are exposed, they may end up having 3 or 4 dinners in the evening as opposed to 1 because food's around them. There's also context around affordability and access to foods, the advice that you give about what they eat, when they eat, how much they eat. Consider how realistic that advice is. Also realistic about the advice you give about how they prepare foods. Are they familiar with those foods? Do they know how to prepare them? So it is encouragement around their realities. But their encouragement comes back to what's important to that family. So if for that family, what their desire and their dream, their drive is to actually get their kids to be better at school, to do better at sports, then you use that dream to actually say, well, you can reach that dream through taking care of what you feed your children, when they eat, how much they eat. There are downside to having too many people raising a child, but there is also strength for Pacific having a village raise a child. And I think that strength-based will encourage Pacific family to actually surface out of this ill health, poor health that we're always being mentioned publicly. There are strength of Pacific, and we can turn the tide around by working on the strengths that we have.